Welcome back to the Constitutionals podcast, episode 272.5. I do points. If you did not know that I did that. We have a very, very special guest episode for you. This is an interview that I set up out of the blue. It was fun. It was fantastic. This guy is great. Eric Deggans will be talking to Eric Deggans. He is a TV and media critic. He's done a lot of work with NPR. He's appeared on CNN. If you follow him on LinkedIn or Twitter, formerly known as X, or Instagram, you might see this guy posting about how he sometimes steps in to host the Florida This Week Again, and he's just a smart guy, and he writes about TV, he writes about culture. He's a fantastic person, I've always wanted to talk to Eric, and I'm so glad I got a chance to sit down. I'm so glad he answered my email. He didn't have to. So many people don't answer my emails, but this guy did. You can see him, his journalism and his writings, more recently, he's written a lot of things, including Race Baiter, How the Media Wields Dangerous Words to Divide a Nation. He did not come here to promote anything. He just came here to chat about media, the world, and how it affects everything in our culture and how we take it in and stuff. I'm telling you, he's one of the smartest people I've ever spoken to on this platform. And I talk to a lot of smart people. I can't name a lot. Okay, I'm kidding. Everybody's a genius in their own way. Again, he's done TV criticism. Eric goes off on this on this very well-deserved discussion about the spinoff to Squid Game. I guess this is technically a spinoff. It's a competition. There's a competition spinoff to Squid Game, and it stinks. It's not good. I watched a couple of minutes of it. I'm not a huge fan, and neither is Eric. So it's fun to see him just kind of, as the kids say, go off. I'm scrolling through his NPR page. God, I just whistled there, and he's and there are a lot of things that I read on my own prior to setting this up. Like he did a Roy Wood Jr. piece. He's talked about the new Frasier, a lot of Daily Show things, including the Hassan Minaj New Yorker thing that's been going on, as well as like some SAG stuff. And it's just been it was a fantastic discussion to have with Eric. If you want to follow him and all the social medias and things, he is on NPR. Check out his stuff on NPR. Truly, like everything, like a lot of his written things are right there. Follow him on Instagram at eDeggans. Follow him on Twitter at Deggans. That's Deggans, and Facebook, Eric Deggans. You can find him all over the gaff. He is again, wonderful person and very smart. And if you want to see the video version of this conversation, head to youtube.com/C+comedy. It's under the interviews. I'll come up with some type of fun title at some point. Between now and when I post it, the title will be there. And if you want to listen to the other podcasts we have the Constitutionals, which is the mainline version of wherever this is posted, which is the Entertainment Business News podcast. I tried to do my best to talk about things in the entertainment business news world. You can follow us. You can listen to LinkedIn Logs, which is the job podcast where I try to get a job and talk about jobs in the industry and everything, and how hard that crap is. And baby, we're restarting that debate, that discussion. And because my contract's over. And then there's what's the last one? LinkedIn Logs, the Constitutionals. Oh, and Late Night Lately. Jesus, the Late Night Show, which is the late night show podcast where, not a recap, I just talk about all of the things in late night for the week and things that stood out for me, and I try to choose a story and talk long-windedly about that as well. You can watch video versions for all of those podcasts and more on youtube.com/C+Comedy. News time is coming back. I can finally talk about that because I was taking a long time off, and now we're going to come back and do a couple of stories for the new year here. And you can follow us on social medias: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter @C+Comedy, me @ChadBlackWhite. Thank you for listening, and now tune in for this interview with Eric Deggans. What are you watching right now that sticks out to you?
Right now, well, it's an interesting time for critics because at the end of the year is when you generally look back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm spending a lot of time voting on different critics lists and things like that about what the best shows of 2023 were. So I'm spending a lot of time actually looking back on reviews that I wrote in the past, and things that other people have said that are great, and if enough people said they were great, I might try to check out a little bit of them just to see if I agree. So there's been a lot of that actually. Right now, I'm voting on the Critics' Choice Awards. I'm on committees that come up with nominations, and then the whole membership votes on who wins. And then, I just helped judge something for the Independent Spirit Awards, and NPR is trying to figure out. We have about 5 or 6 people who write about film and television, and we're trying to figure out who's going to write what in this big piece that we do that's kind of the best of 2023. So I'm spending a lot of time actually looking back. But the stuff that I've seen that's coming that I think is really interesting, Fargo's back,
yeah,
and for its 5th season, and its previous season was disappointing. It was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
People may not remember it. Chris Rock was in it. Glenn Turman was in it, and it was set, I think, in the 40s or 50s. And we saw Chris Rock as like a gangland underworld leader. He was the leader of sort of the Black Mafia in Kansas City, and he was running up against another organization, and there were other people involved. And so it was the first time Fargo had that many characters of color in it.
Yeah.
And I always feel like there are times when I can tell that a show features a lot of Black characters, but doesn't necessarily have a lot of Black writers, or doesn't have a lot of Black writers who have agency and power and can affect how the storytelling is, because it always feels like a little too careful, like what the characters do feels a little too careful and a little too mannered and a little too predictable. And so I don't know if that was the case with the last season of Fargo, but I really felt like they never really let Chris Rock's character fully do what he might be capable of doing, or fully be what he might be capable of being. And it always felt like those characters were held back a little bit, were restrained. And I think that sometimes happens when white showrunners are writing Black characters and they're trying to be careful. So that was kind of a disappointing season. This season is much better. Fargo's an anthology, so it's going to be a completely different story. And John Hamm plays this sheriff in North Dakota who is almost like a cult leader, kind of a MAGA style, authoritarian who runs his jurisdiction as if he is, the supreme leader. And is very strict and brutal when people transgress his rules. And Juno Temple, who people will know from Ted Lasso, plays a woman who was once his wife and ran away from him and assumed a new identity. And she gets arrested when she's living her new identity, which is as a Midwestern housewife. And suddenly she pops up on his radar again, and he goes after her. And there's a lot of really interesting characters in there. Jennifer Jason Leigh plays this woman who runs a family run corporation, and she's ruthless, and she comes up against John Hamm's character in a really interesting way. And Dave Foley from Kids in the Hall plays her right hand man. He's also really interesting. These characters are really vivid. They're not holding back. They they are really going for it. And Lamorne Morris plays a sheriff who kind of, or an officer who kind of gets caught up in what's going on when he tries to save Juno Temple, when these thugs who work for the sheriff, for John Hamm's character, come after her. So it's a really interesting tapestry of characters. And it may sound like I gave away a lot, but I really basically just said what happened in the first episode, which already aired. Yeah. So there's a lot going on with this show, and I really like it. There's a show on Apple TV Plus called Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, which I also think is really interesting. A lot of people may not realize that Legendary Pictures, which is this production house, created a shared monsterverse. They got the rights to make movies about Godzilla and about King Kong and about Mothra, a few other of these classic, huge, monster characters. And they created through 3 films, they created this sort of shared monsterverse where they're all supposedly in the same cinematic universe. And Monarch: Legacy of Monsters is a series for Apple TV Plus that also takes place in that world. And Monarch is this sort of semi-secret government organization that is supposed to be keeping track of these monsters, but it seems to have lost its way in the modern age. And Kurt Russell and his son Wyatt Russell play the same character, which is a guy who co-founded the agency way back around the time of the invention of the atomic bomb. And now we go back and forth between seeing him as a young man setting up this agency played by Wyatt, to him as an older man played by Kurt Russell, trying to get this agency back on track. He feels it's lost its way. And there's a bunch of other human characters that are kind of caught up in the action. And what I like about it is that it's much more about the characters and the people who are caught up in this situation rather than focusing so much on these giant monsters. And they are very judicious and very kind of creative in how the monsters appear. We never go too long without seeing them, but they're very careful about how they roll them out, because it's really about understanding these characters and these humans who are trying to cope with the fact that these giant, people are realizing these giant monsters exist, and humans have to figure out how to coexist with them on Earth. It's a really interesting show, much better than I thought it would be, and really worth people checking out. So that's some stuff that I've watched that's actually happening now or rolling out now. But like I said, a lot of what I've been doing is catching up on old stuff.
Yeah, and that's completely fair, because as critic and media analysts, you all have to really dive in and kind of be Renaissance people of everything. You have to at least know that something exists. You can't just pretend that, oh, because I didn't like For All Mankind on Apple TV Plus, doesn't mean that I don't that doesn't exist to the 20 or so million people that actually watched it over the course of the 5 seasons or however long it lasts. But
it is, I will say, it is a little easier to sort of refine your focus as a critic because there's so much out there. I started covering television a long time ago in 1997, and back then, when a hit was as big as Friends or as big as Seinfeld, you had to write about it, even if you didn't like it, because it just took up so much of the pop culture landscape. But now, even the most popular show, doesn't have nearly the amount of viewers that those shows did.
Right.
And so, there's always, you can always focus on the shows that you find compelling, even when there are other really popular shows out there that people are talking about. If you don't have something compelling to say about them, or if you don't particularly like if you don't like something, you can say something compelling about it. I don't like Squid Game, the challenge, this reality TV show that was built to sort of replicate in a reality TV show format the fictional show Squid Game. I hate that show, but I can say a lot of compelling things about it because I have strong feelings about it. It's much harder to say something compelling about something that you feel kind of middle of the road about, and
Right.
it's easier to ignore those kinds of shows, even if they're popular, because there's so much else out there that you can talk about.
Whenever you bouncing off that, whenever you have such vitriol for something, and I'm not saying you have that for the challenge,
I
Squid
do,
Game
I do.
challenge.
You know, you're right. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we have such vitriol for something, and let's say you are assigned that by the assignment editor, and they're going, or the by the editor, and they're going, "Hey, can you please write about this?" Uh, how do you approach that to be measured and not come off of as somebody who just has a bunch of points to make against something just for the heck of it?
Well, I mean, again, the point is you should have something compelling to say, and you should have something substantive to say. And so if you have compelling and substantive things to say about a show that you hate, the piece will be compelling and substantive. I think sometimes the interesting moments occur when they come to me, I got a request to talk about the Golden Bachelor. Now I sort of told them, I only watched one episode of it. I'm planning to catch up so that I can do something about the finale, which is on this week. I don't know when this podcast is going to hit, but it's at the end of November,
Mhm.
um, beginning of December, and so I'm going to catch up so that I can say something about the finale. But when they asked me about it. I'd only watched one episode, and again, I'm somebody who's a pretty staunch critic of most reality TV shows. So I didn't like it. And they wanted to do kind of a friendly, hey, here's a new reality TV show that everybody loves. And I was like, people like it. But it's still the same underneath. It's still the same sort of insidious, kind of manipulative
Yeah.
undertaking that a great many reality TV shows are, especially in the Bachelor franchise.
Mhm.
So if I were to talk about it, I'm not going to say it's a great show. I'm going to talk about how much I dislike it and how dishonest it is with viewers. And so, even especially when it comes to talking about reality TV, I think sometimes the producers at NPR are like, you know, it, they can't come to me with those, hey, let's have a fun talk about, a reality TV show, because I think so many of those shows are really destructive.
Mhm.
And so and and what always sort of amuses me a little bit, and in some ways, is kind of a bummer, is that I will say, I don't want to do a fun talk about Vanderpump Rules, or I don't want to do a fun talk about the Real Housewives. And people go, oh, everybody's watching it. Oh, it's so fun. And then 2 or 3 years later, people who are on the show come out and they talk about how they were abused when they were making it. And they talk about how manipulative the production is. And there's these scandals because people connected to it have committed crimes. And then all of a sudden, everybody wants to talk about how trouble in paradise. And I'm like, if you'd have listened to me 2 or 3 years ago, you know, um, we have come to accept some things in our entertainment because it entertains us that we should not accept. And the way most reality TV shows construct their programs is one of them. And we should really be, more critical of these shows, and not, because when they start, they feel like a breath of fresh air, they feel very entertaining, but there's always manipulation and misdirection and exploitation beneath the surface, because that's how most of these shows work.
Yeah.
And so, I just and so, if there's any tension, and it's minor, what they want me to say, what's on my mind. They know that the piece is only going to be good if I'm talking about what I genuinely think, and they value my point of view. So if they want a feel good story about a reality TV show, they'll just find somebody else who has a different view of the genre than I do.
Right.
Um, but ultimately, if there's any tension or any sort of, back and forth, I think it's stuff like that. Sometimes they have a take on something, and I have to say no because I know a lot about this.
Hmm.
I covered the woman. I interviewed the woman who came in second in the very first season of The Bachelor
Oh
because I
wow.
was writing for a newspaper in Florida, and she was from the area that the newspaper was based in, and so she gave me an interview, and all the things that she said about what she experienced in doing that very first season of The Bachelor, like 22 seasons ago or 25 seasons ago, is what people complain about now when they're on these shows. It's what the people who were on Real Housewives and Vanderpump Rules, what they complained about in stories for
Right.
Vanity Fair and other places. It, you know, it's an exploitative medium much of the time, and we can't let the fact that the end product is entertaining distract us from the fact that how it's made can be brutal on the people who participate in it. And you can say, well, they chose to do it, but the fact of the matter is, it is hard to know what you're agreeing to do when you agree to do these shows
Hmm.
because you're told it's one kind of experience, and then when you get into it, you find out it's a very different kind of experience. And
Right.
so anyway, it's a long-winded answer, but that's sort of the deal. They know in general where my tastes are,
Hmm.
and they're happy to have me just come on and give my point of view. And they know I'm always going to try and make it compelling. So when I was talking about Squid Game, the challenge, for example, a lot of people criticize the fact that the original show, the scripted show, is this not so thinly veiled treatise on how abusive capitalism is. And you have all these people who are either crushingly poor or they're saddled with crushing debt or both. And they wind up kind of compelled to compete in this game where they will likely die. And the only person who survives will receive enough money to lift themselves out of poverty and out of debt. And creating a reality TV show where people are fake killed in the same kinds of competitions seems like kind of a gross caricature of the themes of the original.
Yeah.
And it seems like you would only create it if you were sort of tone deaf about what the original was trying to say.
Hmm.
But so a lot of people pointed that out. But beyond that, and spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen Squid Game, but you eventually find out that this Squid Game and the scripted show, it is created to be amusement for super wealthy people,
Yeah.
that they are sort of kicking back and drinking fine wine and eating fine foods and enjoying the spectacle of seeing these poor people tortured and killed for their amusement. And so when you create a reality TV competition show based on all of that, you're forcing the audience to be the wealthy people. like, like the audience is coming to this show and watching these people go through all this stuff and be fake killed for their amusement. And I haven't, I have access to a lot of episodes of it. I've only been able to force myself to watch 3 or 4 of them, um, but to set up a situation where you're sort of making the audience be the bad guy in a weird way.
Hmm.
Maybe they're doing it on purpose. Maybe in the end, there'll be some twist that'll show why it was worth sitting through all this. But for the most part, it just sort of feels like they're asking the audience to disregard all of the themes of the original and just enjoy this reality TV spectacle that was
Yeah.
built around all the games and the visual look of Squid Game. And instead, what's happening is that the themes keep smacking me in the face every time I watch it. And I think, you know, this is terrible. They're recreating, they're re-exploiting people in a way that the original show criticizes.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I think that's pretty compelling, and to say that in a piece or say that in a discussion, or I wrote about it online and it got a lot of discussion on Threads and X/Twitter. I think that can be compelling.
Yeah. I mean, I just saw an article today in the trades that was talking about how one of the contestants got sick from the cookie challenge, the licking the cookie and all that stuff, and that show itself has been plagued since it began production, what, early last year, and we just never heard a good thing coming out of it. So I think it's very important to continue talking about how that show does treat people, and how Netflix just kind of let this slide even from the beginning. I mean, it's just bad. It kind of feels like we're treating people like caged animals, like chickens, and we're just like, go do this, and then maybe you'll live at the end of it. It just
Yeah.
kind of
And one of the things that sort of came out, because several people who've competed on the show have complained about the production process. And one of the things that came out is that like one of the early competitions is this game of red light, green light,
Mhm.
uh, similar to the one that was in the original, where this statue, the head turns around, and when the statue's looking at you, you have to stop. And if you move at all, then you are shot. This die pack kind of erupts on the player, and they fall down like they've been shot, and they're ejected from the game. And then the head turns around, and you run towards this finish line, and you have to stop when the head turns around again. So on in the show, they make it look like it took 5 minutes because that's the way the original game was set up in the scripted show.
Mhm.
But it actually took 5 hours to film it.
Oof.
And so one reason why some people were having such a hard time staying still is because they had to stay still for like 10 or 15 minutes. They didn't have to stay still for like a few seconds or 15 seconds, the way they made it look
Yeah.
on the TV show. And so, the thing to me is sort of like if you're watching a quote unquote reality show that lies to you about something as basic as how long it took to do a competition, what are you watching?
Yeah.
What is why not just watch the scripted thing? Why watch something that's sort of pretending to be one reality when it's actually another reality? And then when you tell people that they lied, then people are like, oh well, it's reality TV, everybody lies. What? And so not to draw, not to be too heavy-handed about this, but is it any wonder that we're in a reality where politicians and media people who are supposed to be dealing in facts,
Mhm.
feel free to bend and twist and eliminate inconvenient facts
Mhm.
and tell whatever story they want and expect people to believe it. It's an ethic that can sort of seep into all kinds of corners of media if you're not careful. So, anyway, I didn't mean to get on my soapbox quite so much about reality
That's
TV,
fine.
but it is an attitude that I think really bugs me because it really can seep into how you regard other kinds of media, and people have this cynicism where they assume that they know how they're being lied to, but they don't.
Mhm.
And that's the thing, right? Don't tolerate the lie because you assume how you're being lied to,
Yeah.
because these shows are very sophisticated and the lie goes much further than you realize.
The way you feel about that show and reality as a whole, reality TV as a whole, makes me well, as a little sidebar, Mr. Beast did the YouTube guy did a Squid Game thing, and I think he did it right in the way that he did it. It just the red light green light was very fast, and everything was just kind of fast paced. It didn't seem like people were abused there, but again, it's YouTube. But the way you feel about reality, like reality TV shows, the same way I feel about how YouTube and all this TikTok and online stuff is created, because now it's so easily accessible, and people who are young are even people who are in their mid 20s and 30s are really taking that stuff in and just accepting it for what it is, and really just living off of it, and profiting off of it, and it just feels as gross as reality TV is, except whereas like that, you have to be kind of active and really go, I'm going to watch The Bachelor, Golden Years. I'm going to watch the rest of these. This is just kind of passive. I'm scrolling, you scroll through TikTok, you watch on YouTube, and you just accept it for what it is. And that doesn't feel anywhere as good as people think it should.
Yeah, I know I probably sound like a grumpy old guy when I say this, but every time I encounter TikTok or the versions of TikTok videos that are on Instagram and Facebook, I feel like I'm stupider
Yeah.
after I've experienced them. Um, you know, on the one hand, being able to experience a lot of different media experiences very quickly can be a good thing,
Hmm.
and allowing individual people the ability to create whatever's on their mind or whatever is in their expertise or whatever they care about. That's a great thing. But the problem is, just as the gatekeepers could sometimes keep people away who had valid and interesting points of view, the gatekeepers also kept a lot of nonsense out of the public discourse, and now that's
100%.
just come flooding and it puts more of an onus on the individual person to do more than just passively scroll through things.
Hmm.
And, if you see something that makes some sort of outlandish claim, you really need to have the media literacy tools to investigate that a little bit before you pass it along or before you believe it.
Yeah.
Because what we find is that people tend to believe media that's passed on to them from their friends or from their friendship circles. So even though, so if somebody creates something and it's misinformation or it's disinformation, and somebody like me debunks it, it doesn't matter because the people who are friends of that person will believe them before they'll believe me. And this is one of the great things that I think maybe we didn't see coming in the social media revolution is the elimination of respect for experience and expertise. When you create a level playing field where everyone can talk about anything, it also creates a situation where you can be the head of the Federal Reserve, or you can be some Yahoo who doesn't have a checking account, and you're both talking about the US economy. And theoretically, either one of your conversations could be elevated if enough people think it's interesting.
Right.
So that's one of the drawbacks when you take away the gatekeepers, is that people who have a lot of expertise in something who try to say, hey, here's why this isn't true, or hey, here's why you need to be more careful when you consume this media, or hey, here's the impact of constantly watching these types of videos on you as a person. It gets lost in the sauce, and you're equalized with all of these people who don't really know much other than how to get attention
Hmm.
online. And that's something, you look at politics, and you see Congress is filled with politicians who don't know how to legislate. They don't know how to use government to help people. They don't really have a strong logical set of ideological values.
Hmm.
But they do know how to get attention, and they know how to raise money, and they know how to create viral videos, and they know how to get on Fox News and Newsmax and MSNBC and CNN and spout off in a way that raises their profile so that they become famous, and late night talk show people talk about them.
Right.
But when you look at the guy who tried to be Speaker of the House, and the former wrestling coach, I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. Um, but one of the things that came out when he tried to be speaker was that he had been in Congress for almost 20 years and had never sponsored legislation that became law. Never.
Mm.
That's insane. Jim Jordan is who I was trying to
Jim
remember.
Jordan. Okay.
So when you're in a reality like that, where your ability to make noise and galvanize attention and get people to pay attention to you elevates you at the same level as people who have an expertise in government or know how economics works, or have a strong set of values about, how our government should work, or,
Mhm.
how, legislation should affect people. When those people are put on an even playing field, that's when you have sort of chaos and craziness, and people don't know who to trust. And, that's the unfortunate consequence of where we are,
Yeah.
um, in media and as a society. And the only solution to it that I can see is that we have to create a smarter media consumer so that they are not as susceptible to all this misinformation and disinformation that's, flooding social media platforms, especially.
Yeah. Well, speaking of media consumer, and this will be the last thing I ask you. I know you're a busy man, but I in 2016 I decided to essentially just stop watching things or listening to shows that didn't have a lot of diversity in it. And now we have these great. I'm trying to find the studies, the Annenberg USC Inclusion Initiative, and then UCLA's diversity report, Hollywood diversity report, and those come out quarterly, like every year. And I love those because it tells us women aren't directing, or women aren't getting chances to direct. There's not a lot of people who were differently abled in TV shows. There's not a lot of Native Americans on, in music or whatever, and I love seeing that type of thing. But does that ever, besides work, but does that for you? Does that ever affect how you take things in? I see Black Lightning poster behind you, and
Yeah.
while that was a great show, it only lasted a couple years on the CW, and for what it's worth, I mean, it was the most, besides Jane the Virgin and maybe Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, one of the most diverse shows at its time on that network.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've been covering the studies created by the folks at Annenberg and UCLA for years. And one of the things that is troubling is how little some of those numbers change over the years. One of the things that we learned from looking at UCLA studies is that TV shows and films that most closely reflect the diversity of America tend to do better economically. They tend to perform better. They tend to make more money. Um, so all of this sturm and drang and angst that happens in Hollywood sometimes about having certain numbers of people of color in the cast of shows and things like that, um, is misplaced.
Mhm.
Because the problem is if a show, well, I wouldn't say it's a problem, but the challenge is that if a show is overrepresents any ethnicity, it may have a harder time in the marketplace because people are looking for shows that reflect the reality they understand and that they live every day, especially young people. So UCLA is constantly proving that you need diversity, a level of diversity that reflects America. Now, shows rarely achieve that, not necessarily because they underrepresent Black people or because they underrepresent Native Americans or because they underrepresent Asian people. It's because they underrepresent Latinos.
Mhm.
Latinos are, about 17 to 18% of our population. They're the largest non-white group in America. And yet, their percentage of speaking roles and major roles in TV shows and films is somewhere around 4 or 5%. And that hasn't changed for years. And I understand why it happens. It's an economic thing.
Mhm.
Um, when you put a predominantly Black cast in a TV show, Black people watch it.
Right.
It is it's just something that happens. Black people are so starved for the sight of authentic depictions of their culture and themselves in TV and film that when it happens, they flock to it. So, if you want to create a TV show or a film that draws a substantial audience of Black people and draws a young audience, because, Black audiences tend to be younger and draws a maybe a more mobile audience because Black audiences tend to be more involved with their cell phones and social media. Then create a TV show or film with a lot of Black characters in it. It's pretty simple. It is not so simple when it comes to Latinx, Hispanic viewers, because you know there's a language that binds a bunch of different nationalities and ethnicities, right?
Mhm.
So you could create a show that stars a Cuban family, and people from Brazil or Guatemala might not feel connected to it. You could create a show that features Mexican characters, and you know, people who are from Cuba or from further down in Latin America, they might not you know, find it particularly representative or might not find that it speaks to them. And so you can't just do something as simple as create a show and put a bunch of Latino characters in it and expect, you know, 18% of the country to tune in, you
Right.
know. You have to be more careful, and you have to create shows that are much more authentic, and you have to create a range of shows. You have to create shows that maybe feature a Cuban family and feature a Puerto Rican family and feature a Mexican family, and then you get a wider swath of people checking it out, right? And that's something that Hollywood is not familiar with or
Mhm.
knows what to do with, or you know, is even sure it wants to invest that much energy in.
Right.
And so you wind up with a situation where it's hard to get Latino people characters as leads. It's hard to put very many of them in shows that aren't specifically geared towards Latino or Hispanic subjects,
Mhm.
and the number never budges. And so there has to be a more concerted attempt, I think, to in particular raise the diversity for Latino characters and creators and
Yeah.
producers and storylines. Um, so those kinds of surveys don't necessarily affect what I watch, but they do allow me to sort of keep an eye on where the trends are going.
Yeah.
Um, there's some concern about LGBTQ characters, that maybe progress there has kind of stalled if you look at some of the surveys. Um, uh, Black characters and Black people are overrepresented. And it's hard for us to hear that sometimes, but it is true. And so, even though we want to push for better portrayals and we want to dismantle systemic racism, we always want to make sure that we're keeping a close eye on how Black characters and subjects are handled. A lot of Hollywood's focus on diversity has been to create shows that feature Black characters and Black subjects, and so we're a
Mhm.
little overrepresented. Asian characters too are kind of a little overrepresented if you look at the studies.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things that have to happen. There's a lot of things we still have to get better on, and these surveys help us get a sense of what's worth paying attention to, where work needs to happen, and in particular where consumers might want to aim their buying power.
Mhm.
If a great Latino centered TV show or film comes along, maybe think about going to see it opening night, opening weekend, so there's a bigger box office, or maybe think about encouraging your friends to go see it, or
Right.
maybe think about watching it as soon as the show debuts so it gets a big rating.
Yeah.
um in that way, because I was just reading this really well done book about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm gonna look it up while we're talking, so I make sure it's called The Reign of Marvel Studios, MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios. And it basically talks about how the Marvel Cinematic Universe was put together, all the different travails and putting together all these interlocking movies that kind of culminated with Avengers Infinity War and Endgame.
Mhm.
And one of the things that they talk about a lot in that book is that one reason why so many Marvel movies were focused on white male characters for so long is that there was a creative committee inside of Marvel that was dominated by an executive who was in charge of toys. Hey man, I'm sorry about that. I know I can talk and talk.
No, 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 no. You're completely fine. That actually happened with Chuck Nice as well. And it is so embarrassing. Like when it happens with people, especially people I know, and I'm sitting there and like the timer pops up and I go, okay, we can do this. I can do this. And then when it gets
I
down
get it
to
in. I
one,
get it in.
oh
That's
my God.
yeah. So anyway, I really apologize for that. But anyway, I just want to finish the thought that I was
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Is
Please.
this book is great. MCU, the Reign of Marvel Studios, and it talks about how all these different movies were made and came together. And I've always criticized Marvel, including me, for not featuring more women and people of color in its big movies. And it
Yeah.
turns out the reason why that happened is because Marvel in the beginning, especially, was very focused on toy sales, and
Mhm.
that was how they planned to make money. They were only interested in making TV shows and films early on. This is like back in the days of Blade and leading up to the first Iron Man and sort of in those early days, they were really focused on selling toys, and they were convinced that they no one would buy or many fewer people would buy toys based on female characters and non-white characters. And
Mhm.
so there was this creative committee inside of Marvel that had a lot of influence over how they did movies and which movies they did. And they mightily resisted any movies that would be focused on women or people of color, which is why, for example, it took so long to make a Black Widow movie.
Mhm.
They actively resisted. They resisted having the character in the Iron Man movies. They resisted having the character in the Avengers movie, and they resisted giving the character her own movie.
Wow.
So it all comes down to money,
Yeah.
and more than that, it comes down to these misguided assumptions that often white people make about what makes money, and they assume that we heard for years and years and years that movies starring black people and movies starring non-white people, blacks and Latinos especially, did not travel. They didn't do well overseas. Particularly, they didn't do well in India. They didn't do well in China. They didn't do well in Asian markets. We always heard that. But somebody like Will Smith, if you look at even his worst movies, if you look at the movie that he made with his son, where they were
After
these
Earth.
after Earth, they were stranded on an alien planet. Um, if you look at the revenue, go to Box Office Mojo and look at the revenue of that film, you will see 60% of it came from overseas.
Wow.
So we're not just talking about like the big hits like Black Panther that finally proved that everybody likes Marvel movies, even people in China, and
Mhm.
and even when they start black people. This was a movie that was a commercial failure in America, but it made money because Will Smith is popular overseas.
Yeah.
So, all of this nonsense about, movies starring, black people don't travel and what's the longest selling toy around Barbies,
Hmm.
action figures for women. I
Yeah.
who, what? I just don't understand the thinking. It's so frustrating, and so often when you want to try to understand why there's a lack of diversity in film or TV, you really have to try to get to the money part of it. It is often a money thing. Uh, it's a systemic prejudice thing disguised as a money thing. That is often what happens. People
Wow.
say we don't want to make movies starring women because people don't buy toys featuring female characters. And then you come back to them, you say, well, what about Barbie? Isn't that like one of the longest running toy lines in forever? Well, that doesn't matter because X, Y, Z.
Right.
Yeah, they have an explanation. They're trying to come up with a business reason to justify these weird ideas that they have that marginalize people who are not like them. And so, it plays out and plays out and plays out. And that's one thing that the UCLA studies and the Annenberg studies have also been very good at debunking is all of these nonsensical reasons that people offer for why there can't be a wider diversity of lead characters or a wider diversity of directors or a wider diversity of showrunners. They prove through their studies that, a lot of these products created by these people make a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah, and I see it now, especially when looking at the showrunner for The Flash was a black man,
Yeah, Eric
and
Wallace, he's actually a friend. I know.
yeah, when I saw that, like I as much even when there were storylines I didn't like or enjoy, I still tuned in because not because of like the wider universe of what are they going to do with Crisis and everything, but
Yeah.
because I wanted to continue to support him, and then as well as the young woman that played Iris and the guy that played Joe, because I like all of those people, and the guy that played Cisco, and it's just it's amazing to now live in this landscape where we can have a huge diverse array of people on TV and in music and in podcasting, which is a new medium in of itself, and in film, and for it to be celebrated and talked about in the way that you talk about it, in the way that you and your colleagues write about it, and uh, it makes me hopeful that even though these numbers aren't as changing as they should be, that eventually at some point in the future, the studios and the execs and everybody in between and below are going to be like, hey, maybe we should start turning into this. Maybe we can put more people of color or differently able people or women or trans people or whomever in any of these projects.
Yeah, and the one of the other things that is just so weird about show business, like Eric Wallace became showrunner on The Flash. Like that show had some instability because one of its showrunners, Andrew Kreisberg, got fired
Right.
in 2017 after he was accused of inappropriate behavior. And Eric didn't replace him; somebody else replaced that guy, and then Eric replaced that guy. But the show had some instability because of it, and it created an opportunity for Eric. I've known him for a long time since he did some writing for the New 52 when DC decided to revamp some of its core characters, and he worked on revamping Mr. Terrific for a more modern audience many years ago. And it was great to see him get that opportunity, but it's so sad that those opportunities often don't only seem to come when there's instability or when there's something's in trouble.
Yeah.
I would just love to see a regular pipeline set up where it's a natural progression that people of color get a shot at these top jobs, and it doesn't take somebody getting removed because of harassment allegations or getting fired for or even taking off for a big movie career.
Mhm.
Um, to create an opportunity. It would be great to have a regular pipeline set up.
Yeah.
Um, because so often, I think about when the Me Too movement first sort of burst on the scene, and that was how Gayle King wound up to being the central figure on CBS mornings
Yeah.
because Charlie Rose had a Me Too scandal. And that was how Hoda Kotb wound up being at the center of the Today Show because Matt Lauer had a Me Too scandal. And, at some point you're like, Lester Holt became, the top anchor on NBC Nightly News when his predecessor was deposed for not being completely truthful about his reporting in some instances. And so it's like, can we have a situation where it's a natural thing that people of color progress into these jobs rather than having them have to take over in crisis?
Right.
When somebody's been fired or when some scandal has happened and the show is unstable, and now, hey, here you go, here's your opportunity.
And then also to keep those jobs, because what the top execs at Disney, I think was a black woman, and she left, and then like other executives at other companies left within the past couple of years, and it's just, and I work at CNN right now, and before that I was at Cartoon Network, and I didn't really see, even if I saw some women in charge, I still haven't seen like a lot of people of color in charge, and it's just, and it's kind of a little bit disheartening, to kind of see that stuff, obviously keep going and keep pushing forward and all that stuff, but to go into an office where, and this is no dragging of him, no offense of him, but I get an email from Mark Thompson, and I go, "You're a British white guy. Like you don't know Atlanta, you don't know New York, you don't know LA. Like you can't be in charge." Like I was championing for Zaslav to put somebody else in charge, maybe a woman, maybe a person of color, somewhat promote from within. And we didn't get that, and we replace, Chris Lick, who replaced the
Jeff
man
Zucker.
before him, yeah,
Jeff
Zucker
Zucker.
before him. And even though I
Yeah,
wasn't a
and you
fan,
look at CNN and you say, where are the black men on air?
exactly, yeah.
Where are they?
There's Victor, and
You
then
know,
there's
there's Victor.
yeah, there's Victor. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
try to think of
seriously.
somebody else.
I
Yeah,
mean, seriously. Now that Don Lemon has left, there's Victor.
yeah,
And Victor's amazing, but he's one guy.
yeah.
And there and Abby Phillip, I've met her. She's wonderful. I think she's great at what she's doing. I'm really glad that she's got a spot in prime time. And the woman who's on after her is also a black woman, and forgive me, I'm blanking on her name, but they're both really good. I'm glad they're getting a chance. But come on, and CNN has a historic problem with black men. Black male anchors do not last at CNN,
Mhm.
and it's been a long-standing problem, and they don't seem all that inclined to change it.
No,
And it's really as you said, it's disheartening to turn on the channel again and again and not see anybody who looks like you at a time when everybody's talking about how important diversity is.
exactly. Yeah,
And there's no game plan for changing that. That's the other thing that's terrible.
mhm,
It's like, okay, here's the problem. How are you going to solve it?
yeah, yeah.
You know, so yeah, it is frustrating to face these things in media, and it's frustrating to see the same problems cropping
Over
up.
and over again.
That's
Yeah,
like I said, this underrepresentation of Latinos. I think the first Annenberg study that I wrote about that mentioned this was 7 or 8 years ago.
mhm,
So it's a long-standing thing.
yeah,
And at some point, people, I mean, what you eventually have to do is figure out a way to make the counter financial argument. That's what the UCLA studies do. They say, if you want to make money, then you have to create media products that reflect the diversity of most people's lives.
mm,
Mostly white, TV shows and films will not make as much money as racially balanced TV shows and films. So you counter you counter the financial argument that's rooted in stereotypes and unreality with a financial argument that's rooted in reality.
yeah. There was a point when I was watching F9, Fast and Furious 9, for the first time in theaters, and very early on in the movie, there's a chase scene when when all
Hey,
the
hey,
main
you know
characters.
something about that movie?
What?
It's all about family.
It is, and it's all about, exactly. That's all we. That's the only thing I take away from the Fast and Furious. It's all about family, and that cars can fly sometimes and maybe go skiing. But I was watching that, and I was looking around at the 5 or 6 main characters, and I went, "There's not one white person," because what's his face passed
Yeah,
away. There's not
yeah.
one white person that's the
I
main
know, it is,
character of these
man.
movies. And I went, look at this, and I'm in here with middle of the day, but with a bunch of other grown men who didn't have to work at that point on a Tuesday, and we're all just enjoying this movie. And all, oh hey, it also happened to have a bunch of brown people who are the top line, above the line actors in it.
Yeah, yeah, look at that, man. I mean, I don't know, man. It's like I always said, why isn't Benjamin Bratt like a bigger star?
Mhm.
Like why, I could just go down the list of Hispanic, Latino performers and just sort of go like, why are these people, starring in stuff more? Why isn't Hollywood doing more with it? Benjamin Bratt was great in Poker Face.
Yeah,
He's still great. Get this guy some more work, Um, so it's just, I don't know, it's just Hollywood's going to Hollywood, and all we can do is kind of speak up and try to remind people and try to push the idea that diversity is important, and encourage it, and give people their flowers when they do it well, and offer constructive criticism when they don't, and hope that we educate the consumer to say, here's might be why this feels inauthentic to you. This might be why, there's a show on Apple TV Plus called The Morning Show about a morning show that was rocked by a Me Too scandal, and then it's a kind of a soap opera.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the thing about it is like it's basically focused on these two white women who are anchors of a morning show. And if you look at the network TV today, that does not exist.
Yeah.
There is no network morning show where two white women are the anchors.
Yeah.
Black women, non-white women, have seats on every, NBC, ABC, CBS.
Even Fox.
Yeah, even Fox. And so, I look at the basic premise of the morning show, and to me, it already feels fake. It already feels inauthentic. It already feels like, there's some other dynamic at play for why we're seeing it cast the way it is. And if you're trying to tell a story that feels like fresh and new and of the moment, why doesn't your morning show reflect the diversity of actual morning shows?
Right.
Why does it look like a morning show from 15 years ago?
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of people love that show, but it's hard for me to watch it because every time I watch it, there's a bit of unreality in how they cast it.
Yeah.
And they have characters concerned about diversity issues that frankly were a thing 10 years ago, but are not necessarily a thing now.
Yeah.
And rather than deal with the current diversity issues, they always feel like they're a few years behind what's actually happening in the genre. And it's just sort of like, why is that? Well, two powerful white female stars wanted to be on the show, Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston. So, again, we get back to that financial thing. So it's always tough to push for what makes sense. And sometimes people really like stuff that's just not right on these issues, and you have to be, the critics, sometimes it's our job to be the spoil sport and say, this may seem fun, but
yeah. That you could put a nice little bow on that. It's very succinct. Eric, you're a very smart person. I knew that from your writing, but even speaking to you, it's crazy. I feel like I didn't bring enough of my. I feel like I'm the media analysis of people that I know. That was like, you just gave me like. I feel like I was talking to Fraser Crane, and like he was explaining Probst to me. Not like shit, like. Just give me a whole
well, man, thank you so much. I mean, it's just I've been covering this for a long time, and I've been talking about it for a long time, and the challenge is to find new ways to talk about the same dynamics, because these dynamics, are longstanding. I just reviewed a film on Netflix called Stand from the Beginning, and it's a documentary film that basically tries to bring to life the book called Stand from the Beginning. Ibram X. Kendi, noted anti-racism scholar, he wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist. This was his first really attention-getting book, where he went back in history and found where all the tropes, the prejudicial tropes about Black people actually came from. He tells the history of them. And a lot of it is rooted in, what I talked about a minute ago. It was rooted in economics. Slavery has existed in the Western world for a long time. But Europeans, were enslaving other Europeans. They were enslaving Slavics. He says that that's where the word slave comes from.
Wow.
But at some point, some of the people involved in the slave trade realized that if they enslaved Africans, people with brown and dark skin, it would be harder for them to run away. It would be harder for them to blend into the crowd in Europe or eventually in America,
Mm.
and they could be more easily controlled. And so they began to invent prejudices against Black people, saying that they were animalistic and that they didn't have souls and that they didn't have any, sort of society, in order to justify enslaving them and, earning huge sums by, focusing the slave trade on people from Africa. And
Wow.
so, the documentary sort of goes through a lot of this, but what he's always doing is trying to say, there's an economic component to this, or there's a strategic component to this. There's a reason why Confederate statues popped up in the 1920s and
Mm.
not during the Civil War. They popped up in the 1920s because white people were trying to scare Black people out of voting so they could take their voting rights away from them. If you look closely enough, you will see strategic and often financial reasons for why we're struggling with these stereotypes. And it goes back, this shift towards Africans in the slave trade happened in the 1400s.
Yeah.
So the tropes about Black people being bestial and untrustworthy and sexually promiscuous and violent, they started then. They started 700 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still fighting the same kinds of prejudices, and
Yeah.
we're trying to find new ways to talk about it, to just keep people engaged in the conversation and keep them committed to the idea of beating these things down. And it just shows you how hard it is to overcome these stereotypes, because there's too many sectors of society that have a vested interest in believing them, and you have to work really hard to convince people to let go of these things that, frankly, them and their parents and their parents' parents believed.
Yeah. That's very astute, and I love, and I think that's a great recommendation. The documentary and the book too. I think I will definitely have to check both of those out, because that is
Yeah, the film is a great way. It's a primer on the book.
okay.
It's a little over an hour, I think, and
Mm.
it's a great way to get sort of a quick digest of what the book is about. And if you find those stories compelling, then
Mhm.
you can go to the text and get a lot more detail.
More of it. Okay. Well, I will do that. Thank you so much, Eric, for the suggestions, and thank you for sitting down with me. I appreciate it. Hopefully, we could do this again, because I feel like there's a lot of
Anytime,
things left unsaid.
anytime.